Thank you so much, Mary. Okay, so next up we have our keynote speaker for today, and that is Amber Vo, who's an adoptive mother. So Amber Vo is a Catholic wife and mother in the St. Louis Metro East area. After nearly 7 years of marriage, most of which were spent battling infertility, and 2 miscarriages, Amber and her husband felt God calling them to adopt. They adopted a son in May of this year, and here to share her story with us, please welcome Amber. This is Kai.
Hi, Kai.
Yay,
When my husband and I married in late 2010, we knew we wanted a large family. We started actively trying to conceive very early on, and after only a few months of charting my cycles, we knew something wasn't right. Ovulation predictor kits and a doctor's appointment a few months later confirmed that I was not ovulating. That first doctor's visit was the start to a very long journey that led us through infertility and eventually to adoption. In the summer of 2016, after more than 5 years of fertility treatments and 2 miscarriages, we started to reflect on our desire to be parents. We knew God wanted us to be parents. We had such a strong desire for children that we felt certain God had placed in our hearts. After much prayer, we realized our dream was to be parents, not necessarily to give birth. That's when we realized God wanted to fulfill our desire to be parents through adoption. So we began the home study process and contacted an adoption attorney. When we first started our adoption journey, we chose to search for expecting mothers on our own. We made up adoption business cards with our picture and contact information and gave them to Coalition for Life St. Louis and to anyone we knew regularly prayed outside of either our Planned Parenthood or Hope Clinic, as well as our family and friends, so they could leave them in restaurants and stores or pass them on to anyone they knew facing an unplanned pregnancy. We even posted them to bulletin boards and coffee shops and other local restaurants. We created an adoption Facebook page. We mailed letters telling our story and explaining our hope to adopt a newborn to labor and delivery departments at hospitals and OBGYN offices. And we made a large sign that says, "Please do not abort. We will adopt your baby. Come talk to us," and stood with it outside of Hope Clinic every Tuesday and most Saturdays, as well as occasionally outside of here, Planned Parenthood. That sign ended up being such a blessing to us. God used our story to change hearts and rescue babies from abortion. So many women came and talked to us on the sidewalk, and all but one ended up either parenting their baby or placing their baby for adoption. After 6 months of searching for a potential birth mom on our own, we decided to join the adoption agency that did our home study in January of this year. I continued holding a sign outside Hope Clinic every Tuesday, but our match ended up coming through our agency. I will never forget the day. It was a Monday morning, and I was sitting in my living room when our caseworker called me to say she had an expecting mom who wanted to meet us. But that wasn't all. She was due in 2 weeks. Unfortunately, it wasn't the kind of match we had daydreamed about. Our son's birth mother was an alcoholic and drug addict. She had been drinking and smoking methamphetamines and marijuana throughout her entire pregnancy and had received no prenatal care. We cautiously agreed to meet her the following Tuesday. During that week, we talked to the pediatrician we had chosen, as well as 2 nurses we knew who had experience working with children with fetal alcohol syndrome. We never imagined we would accept a placement of a baby who had been exposed to so much in the womb, but we were open to the idea. We gathered all the information we could so we knew what to expect. We wanted to be prepared for the worst case scenario. The following week, the meeting with our expecting mother went well. She seemed nice and we got along great. We had similar interests, and she was really excited about our family's diversity since my husband is from Vietnam and we both speak Vietnamese and plan to teach our children. I ended up exchanging phone numbers with her, and she asked if I wanted to come to her doctor's appointment the next Tuesday. During that week, we prayed and worried and talked nonstop about whether or not we should consider adopting this baby. It seemed like everything was falling into place, but the thought of having a child with special needs seemed really scary to us. Neither of us had ever known anyone with fetal alcohol syndrome, and we knew there was a chance this baby would have it. When we met the mother, she told us she had really cut back on her alcohol intake, and once she found out she was pregnant. I asked what that meant, and she said she only drank vodka and could make a bottle last 2 whole days. Obviously, that is still a lot of alcohol, so we were quite worried. The Sunday before Kai was born, my husband and I were at church, and for some reason did not sit in the middle section like we normally do. We sat over in front of the St. Joseph altar that our church has. That meant when we went forward to receive communion, we were kneeling in front of this beautiful statue of St. Joseph, the foster father of Jesus. We didn't know it at the time, but both of us were kneeling there praying that God would make it very clear to us what we should do. We were both reflecting on St. Joseph's life. He was scared when he learned Mary was with child, yet he courageously chose to answer God's call to stay by Mary's side and to parent the Son of God with her. After church let out that day and we got in our car to go home, my husband began to tell me the thoughts he had during Mass, and I told him I was having the same thoughts. I said, I think God wants us to have this baby. I think we should just take a leap of faith. If he ends up having fetal alcohol syndrome, God will give us the grace we need to parent him well. My husband agreed wholeheartedly. 2 days later, I went to the expecting mom's final doctor's appointment with her, and the very next day, Wednesday, May 24th, she called me at 6 a.m. to say she was headed to the hospital in labor. When we arrived at the hospital, we got to spend several hours with Kai's birth mom in her hospital room while she was in the early stages of labor, and that allowed us to get to know one another much better. Out of respect for her privacy, I won't go into details about the things she shared with us, but let's just say she has had a really tough life. It opened our eyes to the struggles people have and why they end up turning to drugs and alcohol. I was pleasantly surprised when she told the nurse she wanted me to be in the delivery room with her during her birth. Once labor started getting more intense, my husband left and waited in the room that the hospital staff had prepared for us down the hall. One of the nurses came back and said, "It says in your file that you've been using drugs and alcohol during your pregnancy, so I need to know when the last time you used was and how much." My knees locked and my heart sank when she replied, "Well, last night I smoked some meth and had a couple shooters, and does marijuana count? I smoked some of that on my way to the hospital this morning so I could call my nerves for the delivery." I was horrified. I thought for sure the baby would be born with all sorts of health issues. In fact, the pediatrician pulled me aside at one point and explained that our baby would likely have fetal alcohol syndrome and what they would do if he did. I just kept praying that God would protect this baby, and I continued to remind myself that even if he did have special needs, God would give us whatever we needed to be the best parents to him. Finally, the time came to push. Kai's birth mom had labored without any medication this entire time and was really weak and struggling to push him out. I stood by her side along with two of her friends and cheered her on, offering encouragement throughout each big contraction. Within minutes, Kai emerged and was rushed over to a warmer to the side of the room. With his mother's blessing, I joined him and the doctor off to the side. I remember my heart racing as I looked down at this seemingly perfect baby. He was so beautiful. I had mixed emotions at the time. I remember my eyes filling with tears as I thought, oh my gosh, he is so perfect. Is he going to be my son? Is he ours? Am I his mom now? Because of course when you adopt, the biological mother cannot sign over her rights for 48 to 72 hours depending on which state you're in. The doctor leaned over and said quietly to me, "He doesn't have fetal alcohol syndrome." A wave of relief washed over me, and I thanked God for protecting him for those 9 months that he grew in a toxic environment. The doctor then explained that they were going to test him for drugs in his system, and that most likely he would begin experiencing withdrawals from the methamphetamines about 24 hours after birth. The nurse brought Kai over to his birth mom, and she held him briefly before passing him to me and asking the nurse to get my husband. We rejoiced over this perfect and beautiful little boy and prayed we would get to call him our own soon. About an hour after his birth, we took Kai down the hall to our room and decided we would enjoy him and not worry about what was to come the next day. It's amazing how, even in the midst of fear that his biological mother would not go through with the adoption, and fear that he would begin shaking and sweating as his body craved the drugs that he had tested positive for in his body after birth, we bonded with him as if he were biologically ours. We were filled with so much love for this tiny baby we had only known about for 2 weeks. We shed tears of joy, we argued over whose turn it was to hold him, and we stared in wonder as we watched one another become parents after nearly 6 years of trying to grow our family. It was an amazing night. When the 24-hour mark rolled around, we watched and waited for the dreaded withdrawal symptoms to begin. When a baby is exposed to drugs in the womb, a nurse comes around to check him every 4 hours around the clock. If the baby each time they see a withdrawal symptom, they add points based on the severity of that particular symptom. So if the baby reaches an 8, they must stay in the hospital, possibly even the NICU. If the baby reaches a 10, he is given medications to help his body adjust to no longer having the drugs in his system. Praise be to God, Kai only made it to a 6. It was truly a miracle. The worst symptom he experienced was breaking out in sweats. All he needed was extra snuggles to keep him happy as his body detoxed from the drugs that had been in his system. God had answered our prayers and protected our baby. A couple of days later, his birth mother signed the surrender papers and he officially became our son.
Yay!
I sometimes think about the what ifs. What if we had allowed the fear of the unknown to win and we had turned down this placement? Words cannot describe how much I love Kai and how much joy he has brought to our lives. I can't imagine my life without him. It seems like he's always been a part of our family. I thank God every day that He gave us the courage to say yes to Him when He asked us to take a leap of faith and agree to this adoption. We actually picked out Kai's name on that Sunday that we decided we wanted to adopt him. Kai means joy in Vietnamese, and so we knew that had to be his first name. He has two middle names. The first is Joseph in honor of St. Joseph, whose example of courageous faith led us to adopting our son, and the second is Daniel, which is the name Kai's birth mother had picked out for him. When we were in the hospital, she asked if we had a name picked out. We shared the names we had chosen and asked if there was a name she had planned on giving him had she kept him. She told us Daniel. Yeah. The name Daniel had special meaning for her and Kai's birth father. Because Kai's birth father had committed suicide before she was able to tell him she was pregnant, she wanted to give him that name in honor of his deceased father. So we told her we'd be happy to give that as a second middle name to him. And that is how the name Kai Joseph Daniel came to be. During our adoption journey, we had hoped to have an open adoption and maintain contact with our child's birth family. We do send monthly updates and photos to Kai's birth mom, and she and I texted for the first couple of months after he was born so that she could get photos anytime she wanted. But unfortunately, due to her addictions, we don't believe it's in his best interest for them to meet in person anytime, at least not in the near future. However, he does have a full biological sister who's in foster care, and we have met both her and the foster family. We're staying in touch with them and hope that Kai will get to grow up knowing his sister, and I hope that will be a real gift to them both as they get older. Adopting our son Kai has been one of the best decisions we ever made. I love him just as much as I could ever love a child I gave birth to myself. He is mine through and through. I don't think it's a coincidence that the rate of infertility is increasing at the same time the rate of unwed mothers is increasing. I believe God turns bad situations into good all the time, and I think this is no different. I wish women facing unplanned pregnancies knew what a gift their baby could be for families desperately desiring children. I know pregnancy isn't easy, and I know it's really hard to allow another family to raise your baby as their own, but it's far better than the alternative of ending that child's life. And adoption can be such a beautiful and wonderful experience for birth mothers, too. There are way more families seeking to adopt than there are babies available for adoption. If only the women going into abortion clinics across this country each day knew that, then maybe they would choose life for their babies and bless another family in the process. Thank you.